We're standing in the parade ground of Fort Pickens. It's right outside of Pensacola, Florida, and it was a fort commissioned in 1825 by President James Monroe. It was part of a system of forts to protect the newly commissioned Navy Depot, which is nearby, and was finally decommissioned in 1947. So let's go check it out. By the start of the Civil War, Fort Pickens had been vacant since the Mexican-American War. That all changed in January 1861. Florida was preparing to secede from the Union, and Confederate forces were gathering in and around Pensacola Bay. It was not likely that the small contingent of Federal officers would be able to hold Fort Barrancas, McRae, and Pickens. Although it was in a state of disrepair, Lieutenant Adam Slimmer, commanding U.S. forces at Fort Barrancas, determined that Fort Pickens was the most defensible position in the area. He decided to abandon Fort Barrancas. Around midnight of January 8, 1861, shots rang out as guards repelled a group of local civilians who intended to occupy the fort. Some historians claim that these were the first shots fired in the Civil War. On January 10, 1861, as Florida declared its secession from the Union, Slimmer destroyed over 20,000 pounds of gunpowder at Fort McRae. He then destroyed the guns at Fort Barrancas and moved his small force to Fort Pickens. The Federals felt that it was only a matter of time before the Confederates would attempt to take over their position. Rather than engage in armed conflict, Confederate forces arranged a meeting with Slimmer's men. Led by William Chase, who was the chief engineer who oversaw the building of Fort Pickens, and his assistant, Ebenezer Farrand, they met with Slimmer and his assistant, Jeremiah Gilman. Whoever attacked the fort, Slimmer made clear, would be responsible for the bloodshed. The possession of the fort is not worth one drop of our blood, they believed. The matter was soon out of Chase and Slimmer's hands. On January 28th, Stephen Mallory, one of Florida's former senators in Congress, sent President James Buchanan a message. As long as reinforcements stayed away, the militia would not attack the fort. The truce fell apart the day that Lincoln became president on March 4, 1861. Confederate General Braxton Bragg replaced Chase, and Confederate President Jefferson Davis gave Bragg the option to attack. In March, due to conflicting orders between the Navy and the Army, the reinforcements meant for Fort Pickens were delayed. Lincoln ordered reinforcements to the fort on April 1st. They did not arrive until April 12th, the very day hostilities began in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, Fort Sumter. Slimmer was relieved by Colonel Harvey Brown. The fort was further reinforced by Colonel William Wilson and elements of the 6th New York Infantry Regiment by late June that year. On the morning of November 22, 1861, the stalemate was broken by the sound of Union cannons inside Fort Pickens. The Confederates returned fire from Fort McRae and Fort Barrancas. The fighting only ceased due to a thunderstorm that rolled in that night. The battle continued the next morning and was so intense that the flags of both Confederate forts were shot away. The cannon volleys were fast and furious until the early morning hours of November 24, 1861. Ironically, the guns that were built to work in concert with one another were turned against one another, like the country itself. According to one Confederate soldier, The bombardment could be heard up to 125 miles away, and in its wake, the fight left 44 casualties of war. Fort McRae was nearly destroyed, and the town of Warrenton and the Navy Yard were destroyed as well. Both Union and Confederate commanders of the battle both declared victory. We're standing outside the inner walls of Fort Pickens. It's a fort that I didn't know anything about, and I don't think many people do. It's not something you read about in history books. Its history being built is shrouded in a little bit of controversy. I wouldn't say controversy, I would say it's just wrapped up in the ugly history of America. Most of these bricks you see behind me were laid by slave labor. The construction was plagued with bouts of yellow fever, heat exhaustion, death, all of the above. Which makes it even more ironic because, not ironic, there's poetic justice in that this fort became a stop along the Underground Railroad where many runaway slaves came to seek their freedom. So not insignificant at all. So this fort was actually active all the way through World War II. And it was decommissioned because military technology had just surpassed what this fort was usable for. They did install a battery of updated cannons for the World War II era, but ultimately it just, like many other forts, they live past their time and then they're decommissioned. So this fort just stands today as a kind of a memory of a short blip of history that happened in Pensacola, Florida during the Civil War. On September 20th, 1899, a fire broke out in the warehouse. The fire spread to a gunpowder magazine, causing a massive explosion. It littered the area with brick fragments for miles. The explosion completely destroyed the northwest corner of the fort. 2 soldiers lost their lives as a result. The damage was never repaired and remains a scar on the fort to this day. As you can see here, the fort structure consists of a series of archways. What you can't see is the arches that are underground. So these are a double arch architecture, and it was meant to distribute the weight of the fort. So Fort Pickens is a masonry fort built in the style of fort for the War of 1812, and it was the largest mason fort on the Gulf of Mexico at the time of its building. So it was a really heavy structure, so it needed to distribute the weight in the sandy ground. And on top of that, on top of the fort, there were also large guns, so 15-inch cannons that were mounted about every 20 or 30 feet along the upper rim of the outer wall there. So without the archway design, it would have started to sink in the sand. You can also see on the wall there the limestone starting to seep out from between the bricks. Mortar had to be locally sourced, and what they used was sand, obviously, cement and the limestone that was readily available. Over time, what happens is the limestone will start to seep out, and that's what you can see, the white substance going down the walls there is the limestone. But because of the archway design, the bricks are actually held in place by the force and weight of the structure above it. So it's pretty solid. It's also really unique. And as we make our way through the hallway here, you can see the arches every so often, and you can see there's notches on the left hand side of this one right here. That's to make room for the updated cannons that were added later in the 1890s. Yeah, so overall, pretty cool. Here's one of those cannons pointed out to sea. So I did want to show you what kind of a vantage point this fort has. And that's out towards the Gulf over there. Going all the way around. And there, over there, by those two water towers, is the Naval Air Station. Pretty cool. So we're walking along the outer wall now, looking towards the inner courtyard or the parade ground of the fort. So down below there, that's the parade ground. For much of the history of this fort, that's where the soldiers actually slept in tents. And here's the gun emplacements, or I forget what the name of it is, but these are where the guns were placed. Right now they're pointed out towards the Gulf, but as you can see, like the other one, can be swiveled back and forth. Right there, that's the new battery that was built in 1890. That's some of the new architecture that was built around that time. You can tell the difference. It's more steel and cement rather than masonry. And that is the story of Fort Pickens. If you like what you saw, please remember to like and subscribe so we can continue to make videos just like this one. Until next time, thanks for watching. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His roof is